Ahmed, right?
Say your markets, I mean, say your markets. Everybody that come, you cut them well. So after the back, I'm like, alpha, you do what I'm saying.
Can I say something very controversial as well? I think there are a lot of people who, and I don't say this in judgment, but I think there are a lot of people who think they're Christians who actually aren't. Because it's our culture in certain parts of Nigeria, like, okay, Christian, if you want to call them Christian hubs, areas in Nigeria where like the majority of the population are Christian and they go to church. But if let's put it this way, what you're talking about, if someone does an altar call and all they've been preaching about is prosperity and they're like, okay, if you want this car, come and know Jesus, that's not the gospel. So what are they responding to? Because you're supposed to believe in the gospel, but if you don't understand that Jesus has forgiven your sins, he died for your sins, he loves you, then, and that's why I say that I understand what you're saying, but I think that if people genuinely have a revelation or an encounter with God, their own personal encounter, and that can look like anything, then there is a hunger to know God, because once you've kind of tasted even a little bit that, okay, this is who God is, like, I want to know more, because maybe it's less simplistic.
You know, I think there's a place for you can have that personal, intimate interaction and not know that you had it, or give the credit to your pastor. And this comes with it, and it's. I actually think it's a very tricky thing. If I'm very honest, I don't think a lot of pastors go there and think I want the attention for myself. But the motive switches a certain place where sometimes you don't know. Let's say God has given you a strong burden for something, and now you believe that God has given you this burden, and it's why you started the church you started, and things built out of it. And because of that, the weight of that of the expectation or believing that call was yours, when somebody comes with a different perception, you trump it out because you still feel like, well, this thing is the vision God has given me. It's very hard for me to let go and give authority to somebody else or empower other people. And so they start holding on to power in some ways, and then it comes in the way you interact with your congregation, because there's some truths that if the church knew, the pastor would feel like they lose a level of control over their congregation. And so you become very sensitive of what information release and don't release. And to you, your motive is good. You know why you're trying to do God's work.
Losing touch
but
of what you're supposed
what
to
has
do.
happened is it's shifted a little bit. You're still trying to do right, but the motive between you're doing right has kind of gone from just God to me doing God's work, as opposed to God's work being done.
And there's a difference in doing the work for God and knowing the God of the work. Like what you said, there's a difference. You can do the work for God and still not know God, because it comes down to, like you said, a personal relationship. Because especially when you grow up in church, there's nothing like. You can know about God and not know God. You grow up in an environment where everything is God. You grow
like you're always
you're always there.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a PK, you have no choice. I tell people, I was born into a Christian family. I didn't choose Christianity. I was born and I was just a Christian by association. And my parents were pastors, so Monday was singles, and Tuesday was prayer meeting, and Wednesday was midweek service, and Thursday was
every Christmas. There was Bible that every Christmas.
Married men and women. Friday all night, Saturday rehearsal, Sunday 2-3 services. I was always in church, and because we were kids, you were there. So church was part of your life, you know, and until you have that experience and encounter with Him, you know, that personal relationship where you choose God for yourself, not because you were born into it, then it doesn't become real.
It's funny because, you know, even like you say about that, like, because it goes from being church goes from, even if it was an option, it never felt like it was an option. So I was going because I was going.
It was just normal. It was a normal thing to do. I feel like even getting into ministry, like as a PK, it was like this is something that's meant to happen at some point. And it's I feel like it's just so easy to get into the motion. Yeah, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. You're not even realizing. It's like what you said. You're literally just serving, which is good. You're not doing anything bad, but you're not thinking about your own relationships. I think something where you need to like literally stop and, you know, paying attention in terms of growing your own relationship and serving the people as well.
I think it's weird because I always thought I was never like extremely rebellious. But then there was that line, when I used to think about it, it was like, okay, I was never crazy. I was never like crazy rebellious. But then when you move from judging yourself based on what becomes the world standard. Well, the world are doing this, and I'm a Christian. I'm not doing this and this.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a personal relationship. By the time I got a personal relationship, I realized the things that did not seem crazy to me were still out of alignment because I didn't have that personal relationship. I was a Christian by association.
Yeah.
And so until you get to a personal relationship with God, there's so many things that you do that you don't realize are not God, because your perception of God are just you. I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this. As opposed to what are the heart behind the things you're doing.
But I think more pastors need to start really both preaching and teaching about knowing God and how what that could look like for people, because we're talking about putting people on pedestals. I think the problem is that because there's always going to be a pedestal, and that pedestal is like worship, because we're made to worship. And if they don't put God on that pedestal, they're going to find someone else to put on that pedestal. They're always going to find someone else to put on that pedestal.
They just need to speak the truth. It's like, if we feel this is what God is saying, say it. But I think there's always a risk of like not having your church as full. So I don't know, it's a bit tricky, because don't you want, isn't it, I guess you want more people to be listening, but then I feel like some people just get to a point where they're thinking, I feel people just get to a point where they're thinking, I need to say this, because people will go to certain churches where they want to hear certain things, you get? And you know how like certain churches would do like conferences with themes, like where people actually want to learn about singles. But I'm just thinking, what if there's a point where it's like God is literally trying to get a certain message across? When do you draw the line between just giving a message because you're trying to get people to come and like saying what the Lord is really telling you?
Well, I think as a pastor, you're a mouthpiece, and if you're just saying things just to say, then you've already missed it. If you're doing things just to do, then you've already missed it. I think for me, one of the hardest things, and will teach you in your ministry, is waiting on God to hear what He has to say. When you're a naturally gifted speaker and you can just stand up there and give me a thing, I'll speak about anything. I don't need to, I'll work it, and when you grow up around, you can put, I could preach a sermon about the rugs right now. Literally. I literally can.
It's funny, so because I've been saying that, I think that this is literally the cornerstone of errors that we've got in the church right now, is there's so many gifted speakers, not enough purpose speakers. People that are talented as speakers, so people will go and hear them because they can make anything sound great.
Right. And then I'm over there every Sunday, literally, or before I have to preach, I'm like, okay, so God, what do you want me to say? That's always, because I'm like, God, I just never want to speak for speaking's sake, because there might be somebody there whose word from God can literally, I've been in situations where someone comes and says, literally, your word saved my life. I was going to do this. So you're responsible for these people. So I'm always praying, God, tell me what you want me to say. Let me not just speak because I want to speak, and then I have to wait till He says something. Sometimes He gives it to me. Sometimes He doesn't give me until Sunday morning. Sometimes I'm about to walk up on stage like, yo, I'm about to walk up on stage.
He just flips the
I
script.
ain't got nothing. You ain't gonna make me look crazy now. Come on, God, drop the word. And then when I get on stage, He gives it to me. But it's that place of always being certain that you are speaking what He wants you to say. And also, you brought something else up, how we judge success in ministry. Because a lot of times people say you're successful when your church is full. By the size of the crowd, the question is, no, do they know God? Are they growing? Are their lives being changed? Are their lives being transformed? And so when you start doing things to pull crowd, you already lost it. Your motive is wrong.
I'm just to get controversial because
You talking Nigeria?
Yes, Nigeria. Because this is my issue.
Go there.
And I think generationally, and I say this as a PK because I have to just, is how wrong maybe the generation before us got it. Because I think what it is that happens is we go to church, which is cool, we understand it, we see it, we go. Now, because we're in a place where churches have not been, and actually it runs a lot like Nigeria. And this point is that you see a lot of the issues that you see in Nigeria and the church, where leadership has not changed hands to the next generation. So where I talk about that is that we look at the older generation, and because of that, the church resembles the perceptions of the older generation, and the younger generation are not being fed into that, and and there's no level of understanding. So when you start going to church here, you start thinking, this is how I've got to behave. And when I got in, honestly, I've struggled with this how I dress matter. And I'm looking at you because you have helped me. We are trying to just support ourselves. Because it becomes this thing of what does respect look like? What is you supposed to dress like? And all of these things.
You have to get the respect of the people.
And they're so important to be able to trust that people can relate to you the way you are. And because the older generation have fixed things to look the way they do, and church looks the way it looks, and things happen the way they happen, and we haven't got a tent that's covering this generation, it feeds out into the world because the world then think that they don't look like what church is meant to look like.
Because each generation has its own struggles, but we're supposed to be reaching people at their level. So if you're
and
still
we've got to be real. So if we're still looking, and I've been thinking so much about it, when God is putting this desire on me for the church and for the future of the church, I start thinking, look, what happens if we keep on living just the way the older generation are living? The church keeps going that way, and that older generation die out,
You're just
and the church dies out. Because there's nobody else. You've lost.
And then is that older generation
able
to reach the teenagers? Who's going to be the ones?
And
to,
it's important because I go somewhere like
them?
when I was in America, you go to Hillsong.
Yo.
I'm like, how do these people do it? We're queuing around the block in the middle of winter.
Yo.
Yeah.
In London, in New York, these are the places that people don't go to church. That people are usually not church people, but they have
do
the same
4 sermons a day where there are thousands and
but they have a
thousands
very
and
come as you are, which I don't think we have right
And
yet.
that's
You
what
need to get that.
And that's
why
what
do we? The thing you understand, you'll be thinking,
Come
oh, I
as
can't
you
wear
are.
ripped jeans. Is that what I'm supposed to be thinking about? Literally, do you get like so people just feel
Literally,
like
I think
need
we
to
all
dress
focus
up, I
on
need
the
to
wrong
do that,
things. God don't care what color you have on. And that's the thing, literally. And you talked about the cave earlier, and that's the idea is come as you are. Come to your safe place. Come find God and come find love. That's
I like
it.
come find God.
Yeah,
Literally.
it's literally just come, because the cave is a place of safety. So come, I don't care how you look, because culturally, we've put culture into religion, and we've made it a nice stew of doctrine. And now it's said to, so if you come to church, you have to look a certain way. You have to dress a certain way. If you have twists or dreads or plaits, oh God, you're a heathen. Oh, if you're tattooed up. But I'm like, hold on a second. All these songs we sing on Hillsong and all these things, and these people singing with tattered sleeves, earring loops, and hats on, and bare feet on stage, and the anointing is flowing. And we're singing their songs. But oh no, you come to church like that, oh, you're a heathen.
I'll tell you how jarred I was, because honestly, and it really took a shift for me when I first moved to New York. First time I went to Hillsong, because when I first went there, I went to Brooklyn Tabernacle, and I was like, oh, this is good, But the sermon, but the message wasn't catching me, but I was going. And then I went to Hillsong for the first time, and I was like, I'm not going back to this place. Because they had 2 locations, and the second location where I went, it happened in a bar. And so I could still feel the stickiness of the beer from the floor from the night before, where people were turning up on Saturday night. And I was like, how is this church? And people are going forward to the front and they're like jumping up and down like they're in a concert. And I was like, how? But then you come to this realization where like, but you can feel the raw honesty of love. Like it was
That's
there.
what's missing in the church.
My cousin who lives in New York, she's like, she's very active in Hillsong, and they have all these cell groups. And I was like, what do you guys do? Just meet, have a glass of wine.
Yeah, I was like literally
like study the Bible.
to
By the end of the day, you are studying the Bible and learning values and building community. Here, I'll just like.
But it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, definitely.
You grow up in, and that's the thing is don't enforce your culture into God. Tell me that, so God don't care if you come into his presence and you have a hat on. God is not bothered, because the more he cares about the state of your heart. So you come and you have a fitted hat on. Oh God, you're going to hell. But my head is exposed, but my heart is filthy. But I have a hat on, but my heart is contrite and open towards God. And God says, that's who I'm going to use. And we get stuck on all the things that God don't care about.
How do you break this mold though? Because I feel like culture is like way above us.
I think
culture is like generation. Do you get like?
Yeah, I think you have to go from the root, because again, when you look at like when you talk about the Father heart of God and about love and all these different things, you have to ask yourself how many Nigerian children or even adults when they were children could really talk about affection from, let's say, their dad, for example. How many people could talk about it like that? I'm not saying that no one could, but do you understand what I mean? Is that it's hard to, right now, it's one of the things that I'm even going through with God. Like, I'm just like, God, I grew up, and I say this with all love, I grew up in kind of an atmosphere where it was like, okay, if you make a mistake, like, and it wasn't on purpose, but I withhold affection from you. I keep you at arm's length, even if only temporarily. Now, what that taught me to do subconsciously was like, okay, do you know what? When you mess up, I'm not happy with your rejection. And that translates into my relationship with God. When I mess up, I'm just like, in my mind, I know all the scriptures, I know about grace, I know about the gospel, I've studied it for like 2 years, but then what do I feel like? I'm just like, I feel like God surely must not be happy with me. He doesn't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
And that then affects me even wanting to come to God, because if someone is angry with you or not happy with you, you're not really inclined to go and talk to the person until they've calmed down. Do you understand? So it's that, I think, that shift has to start. Now, I don't know how, but it has to start by helping people realize that God is not like your parents. God is not like your parents, because people just don't. You see in the way it's fascinating because I've kind of tasted of the best of both cultures. In England, it's funny because where you go to like Caucasian or white churches or charismatic churches, what the emphasis on is like, oh, God is love and you know, God. But the black church is like, God is powerful.
Punishment.
He is, no, but like, you know, it's even. And here's the interesting part is that they're both right. Like it's they're both the nature of God, but
it's
like
wholeness.
Exactly. So one of the interesting things is that if you now go to these churches, like they don't, you find like someone like Prophet Tomi who came to GLA the other time, like you find, and he's friends with one of my friends who is also from kind of charismatic movement, and he is looking at Tomi and he's just like, I want to move in the power that you move in, and Tomi is looking at him and he's like, I want to move the level of love that you move in.
People always have a big issue when it seems like the pastor is living lavish and his congregation, majority of them are poor. And it's like, how is it that, you know, you say that you're, you know, I've also realized there's almost this ideology that Christianity and poverty should go hand in hand. And what people will say is like, Jesus in the time didn't ride on a donkey, he walked around on his feet, you know, so why should you, you know, have the nice things? So if you say you're really a servant, then you shouldn't drive a nice car and you shouldn't live in a nice house. And people have issues with church for that. And I asked the question, like, okay, again, growing up in church, when your parents start a church or you start a church, it's clear that you're the caretaker. It's God's church, but you're the person who's using to start, or the instrument is working through. You know, no one has a problem with the church when they're like 5 people in the living room, and the pastor is using his salary to fund the church, and using his salary, and his kids are not eating, and he's sacrificing. No one has an issue when he calls himself pastor there. When the church begins to grow from blood, sweat, and tears, you know, sacrifice, God blessing, whatever the case, you do God's work, he takes care of you. And it begins to expand where he actually can get a nice house, not off the backs of, because people have this ideology that when they take tithe and offering, it's like they pay into pastor's accounts. It's the big fallacy. Tithe and offering goes into the pastor's accounts. Like, okay, yo, where's your fear of God first? But then God blesses and God uses people to bless, and people all the time, someone will come and say, Pastor, God just said I should bless you. It's like, what? And that's how I will buy you a car. Or someone says, Pastor, I have this house I'm living in, God said I should give it to you because you blessed my life. And then, but when he starts to enjoy the benefits or the rewards of serving God, people's not having an issue with it. Why are you in a nice house? Why? But where were you when he was in a broke house? And so why did you have an issue there?
These are my issues. So I play things down to what is your community effect?
What's your community what?
How much effect you have on your community
as a church?
Because I look at someone, let's say TD Jakes has everything and everything. There's no way you can say this guy has not affected the community with which he's in.
But people still
It is evident.
People still do. People still come for TG even now.
Because when you have so much, like, I start with my question marks, so that, especially in American churches, when people come, I don't know, I think it's all quite complicated. When people charge or don't charge.
Christianity is different too. American Christianity and Nigerian Christianity is different. So for instance, like what you just said, yes.
And even within American Christianity, black and white Christianity is also...
Most American speakers come and they send you a rider.
What?
What? Oh, like a rider is like... It's like your terms of engagement.
Yeah.
And a minimum speaking fee.
When I see.
Yes. And for them,
so
they say that this is their livelihood. So for instance, take it a step further. When they preach, their sermons are their intellectual property. So
sorry.
Hold on.
Wow.
Their ideology is I labored, I created this content, just like you have content that you have content providers. I preach. So when sermons sell, the money is going to them, not to the church, because they own, same way they write books, they own their books, they own their sermons.
So if someone were to like preach the same material and make money off it, they could sue them?
Hey,
I just feel like the fact that this is even a conversation is so wrong.
But
this is serving God.
But then I see that the value. I understand it. The areas in which it's so complicated. This thing, because I hear so you hear of people that don't charge, and just as
He said that was
but
like,
then this thing is also, they don't charge at all if they come and minister somewhere. They don't look for
I mean,
But
I
the
feel
issue though,
like it
becomes
okay
that people that don't get
for like
honorarium.
accommodation and stuff. But when you start talking about intellectual
But then you
property,
should give me the. So
and
I believe
like,
the thing is that.
I feel like that just cancels the fact that I'm not a messenger on behalf of God to do this.
American pastor will tell you that this is my minimum speaking fee.
And I've heard them, and these people's streams are not small.
Minimum speaking fee, $10K. What are we talking about?
$10K is even standard what we do.
Yes, standard.
10K is standard for people do.
Do you think that's okay?
If you know the people that are charging 50 and 100.
What are you talking about?
People who is their livelihood.
Yes.
I guess because they're now like, okay, have a big name, you are paying for my name, but I feel like that's really taking attention away from what things are
That's American
supposed to
Christianity.
do.
Tell you why, but this thing is complicated. Tell you why.
Humility.
But tell you why.
But then they're now abusing your
Because
humility.
they abuse it.
Do you know how people think I've suffered grace of humility?
Yeah.
Hey.
If you go,
I said, I guess you have bills to
this
pay.
thing is very
humility.
Look, this thing is fresh, and I will say it's very fresh. Obviously, I haven't grown
It's tricky though.
and gone to other places. But do you know how many pillows I have in my room? Tell the pillows.
Yo.
Give me pillows.
Yo.
But this thing is a reality.
It's a
And I understand it's a
so they're like,
service, but then there are
Yeah.
people who don't charge, and because they don't charge,
They get
they
taken
go for
advantage of.
costs and stuff, and they get taken advantage of.
And flip it. You flip it on the
But it's
flip
also
side.
biblical for them to be paid in some way. When I say paid, whether it's in food or in whatever it is.
Check it. But then you have even within the church where you invite a secular artist or a secular speaker.
Yeah.
And you realize you have to pay them.
And then you pay them their fee. Fool! But you come and you do the exact same thing because you're a Christian brother.
Yeah.
And can't you do it unto the Lord?
True that. True.
Wait, this is not God. Do you understand? So I understand that it's that
So
thing.
I do understand level, but then my question then becomes,
But
how do you justify how much you charge?
I
That's
don't
the
think.
thing.
I don't
Here's
think.
the thing about Christianity that
you should
you
pay
can't.
Christianity.
There's
There are
no
too many
absolute,
rules and
There's no
laws.
absolute like okay,
And
if you
there's
speak
too
for 1
much
hour, you must
judgment
charge
on these things.
no more than. It's the holy. At the end of the day, it's the Holy Spirit and your conscience. Like
It's tricky.
Bruh, because
People see it as their livelihood.
It's tricky. Yeah.
but that's the thing. It is
Because, I mean,
people's
'cause It is
livelihood.
your
It is.
livelihood. You're leaving
Yo.
your family, like,
Do you
It's people's
understand?
livelihood.
I know some.
Yeah.
I know people who don't do anything else, and that's where they make the money
Yeah.
from.
So this guy's like,
So,
listen, this is my
because
life. So
I
you
will
will pay
say
me.
I don't know specifically
It's a lot of
the
money.
law of
Yeah.
Nigeria, but this is where I think
Just think
this area
gospel should be
becomes
free.
complicated. If I know the law,
They'll free you outside your house.
I know the law. I know the law in England,
Yeah.
and so a church is constituted as a charity.
As a charity, yeah.
Now in
Oh,
England,
don't go
the
down
law is 80% must go into community impact and 20% must be going to pay the costs of the people that are working and all that kind of stuff, employees and all that kind of things. Now, if you have a small church and 20% is just about paying everybody, and that's the law, you can't go outside of that. And 80% must be serving the community in which you're in. That's charity. Now, if your church has grown and your 20% can pay everybody's salary and leave you with like 15% left. Why are the levels of just because in a business, this is how people make their profit. CEOs and all that make their profit. Now then, as a lead pastor, like I want to understand what then justifies how much you say is, because legally, that 50% is okay to split at some level of profit between whatever the board of
talking
directors
England now,
is.
right?
Yeah, I'm talking in England.
Because
so
that doesn't happen.
because if legally that's the law, but then if you see that happening, people are like, yo, what is this pastor doing? Now, how do you justify it? What is the biblical justification? Because you obviously have people who are living incredibly lavishly and can justify it according to it. Because I honestly, I'm still trying to deal with this and understand and reason this stuff in my head.
I think also some people, there's some pastors who are not just pastors. Who are business, who are businessmen, and just because I'm serving the Lord, don't mean that I ain't making deals on the side. When I say deals, not shady deals. I'm talking about I'm running my investments. I'm making stuff, and just because it's like the title pastor is like almost like you're in trouble.
It's like working in government. You can't be rich before you go in government.
But once you say
they
say, do you get what I mean? So now all of a sudden he has a car and they assume that it came from church, or it could have come from his side business. Now, as long as I think you are in a position where you have that position, you should be able to be transparent enough and be clear to people, to let people know, oh, by the way, I am a pastor, but I own a mall. I own this, and have that transparency where it's like, you know what, I make my own money, and you should have it. And most people don't understand that most of these big churches, well, I can't speak for most, but those that I know of, pastor is on a set salary like everybody else. It's on a set salary. He gets. It's not about how much the offering is today. Okay, offering was 100K, pastor, you take 50. Budget was 20K, pastor, you take 10. No, there's a board. There are accountants, the checks and balances, so that way everything runs kind of like an organization.
Are you talking in England or in Nigeria?
No, Nigeria.
In Nigeria.
Oh, okay.
This should be the way. This is the way it should be.
And so if someone's salary might go up at the area because
And there's a justification.
Would you understand that?
Time,
Yeah.
have a family.